organisation, and this is a part of our Eating Disorder Awareness Week. We're kind of helping highlight, obviously, eating disorder, just more awareness, but also our eating disorder support group, which we do offer. So the kind of plan for the next hour would be obviously get an interview hand for about 45 minutes, and then followed up for around 10 minutes of audience questions and answers. Obviously, you don't have to ask if you really don't feel like it, and then afterwards there's obviously a chance to buy the book if anybody wishes to. So just before I go ahead and introduce Han, I just want to lay down some ground rules for the discussion. So to help discussion, but also to avoid any triggering anyone in the room, we're going to kind of skip over, like, we won't go into specifics like calorie counting or morality stats or anything like that. And the conversation is more going to revolve around the feelings, experiences, rather than specific behaviours involved with eating disorders. Obviously, if anyone feels the need to step out any time, feel free to do so. And yeah, just a little bit about Han. Han's a 21-year-old author and psychology student here at Bath. Recipient of the Shortlist Award in the Short Story Competition, Hungary 2011. She's also shortlisted for the 94 Poetry Competition 2013 and Junior Author Short Story Competition 2014. She's co-authored The Wolf in Sheep's Clothing, The Recovery Letters, and is obviously the author of the book series Just Perfect and its sequel Red Ribbons. So yeah, thank you for agreeing to do this. So I guess the first question I want to ask is, obviously, what made you decide to write a book where the main character had an eating disorder?
So the main reason for me to start writing was because I myself had been through several experiences, including depression and an eating disorder, and for me it was quite cathartic to just write about my experiences in order to let them go a little bit and to understand my own thoughts and my own emotions a little bit better. Obviously, at that point, I wasn't really planning to publish anything because it was mostly for myself, and I wouldn't want anyone to read anything I wrote at that point. But then I realized the kind of taboo that was surrounded most mental health disorders, and how people don't really talk about something like having a depression or having an eating disorder, and I sort of wanted to break that stigma, which is why I ultimately published the books as well.
So, are any of the characters inspired by real life people, or any of like your own personal experiences?
I think quite a few of them are, just because it's easier to write with someone in mind, but lots of the characters are also character traits and combinations of different people that I've sort of put together, but also actual friends that I've made throughout my life, school teachers that I've had, people I've met while I was in hospital. So it's a bit of a combination.
So was there any reason that you chose anorexia as the disorder that Christina, the main character, suffers, compared to like other diseases such as bulimia?
Partly because there's some of the other mental health disorders are beginning to be talked about a little bit more nowadays, but eating disorders still, for most people, they think that eating disorders are something you choose for, that you purposely start to eat less because you want to lose weight, that you're sort of bringing it onto yourself, which is not really the case. And also just because that's the eating disorder that I have experience with, and that is has one of the highest mortality rates of any mental health disorders. So that's why I chose anorexia.
And kind of just, I was going to skip through a couple of questions, kind of going back to your point that you mentioned on obviously eating disorders not being well represented in the media. Obviously there's been a couple of kind of TV shows like To the Bone and stuff over the last couple of years that have been kind of told that they've been kind of criticised for glorifying kind of eating disorders in general. For you, what do you think is the best way of portraying kind of eating disorders in media? And like if you were going to do something like that, like how would you think the best way of portraying it was?
That's quite a difficult one because I've had people ask me to watch To the Bone and then give my opinion on it. because lots of people do think that it is sort of glamorized, and I did watch it now. I think it is a bit glamorized, but at the same time, if there's no real story behind it, then people are not going to want to watch it, which also defeats the purpose a little bit. But I think, yeah, lots of the movies and books out there are a bit glamorized, and although that's fine, I do think it's important to show how difficult it can really be to struggle with a mental health disorder, and some of the more darker parts of having a mental health disorder.
So kind of jumping off that, so obviously when you write your book, how did you think to find the balance obviously between trying to glamorise or trying to avoid glamorising the issue, but also kind of depict it in a real way? Did you kind of have a real struggle when writing, trying to find the balance? Or?
I think it was quite difficult at first, but then when I started reading through it again, I realised that some parts needed some more development and other parts were maybe too elaborated on. So I just went through it several times, and in that way tried to change the things I didn't like as much about it. But especially for the second book, I think I drew on a lot of my own experiences and experiences of some of the people that I've met along the way, and in this way I try to prevent just glamorizing it and going with a whole different story from what actually happened.
Really good. So a common theme when I read the book was kind of the link between food and memories. Why did you think that was so important to highlight?
I thought that was important to highlight because when you have an eating disorder, I feel like food is linked to most things because it's a new coping mechanism, not a great coping mechanism, but a coping mechanism that you sort of revert back to whenever things get tough or whenever difficult experiences or memories come up. So if, for example, the protagonist thinks back to some experiences that happened to her, she might restrict her intake because it's making her feel distressed. Likewise, at university, if there's exams, there's higher rates of relapse because there is simply more stress.
So obviously the book explores different approaches to how people react to Christina's diagnosis. Some kind of scorn her like why you kind of starving yourself, and then others more want to just kind of feed her up to kind of solve the problem. Why do you think it was important to highlight the different attitudes and the different kind of reactions people?
There really are a lot of reactions to it because people don't seem to really know how to deal with it or what to do, and many people do try to help, but they simply have no idea how to. So from my own experiences, there have been people that have come up to me and said, do you want me to order a pizza or buy you a cake, and by tomorrow everything will be fine? But that's just not how it works because the mental aspect is obviously much more ingrained and much more important to tackle through therapy or through writing, even through whatever method you opt for. But just eating and even just gaining weight is not gonna get you there, but it's obviously still very much misunderstood by a lot of people.
I know this is quite I'm not expecting you to have like the perfect answer for this question, but if someone had a friend or a family member that was going through like having an eating disorder, like would you have any advice as to how they should kind of treat it, or is it more like a case by case basis thing? Or I know it's quite a heavy question, so I'm not expecting a perfect answer.
It really depends, I think, but there's one thing that I've found to be true for a lot of people, and that is that certain comments about gaining weight, about trying hard to recover, or about appearance can be quite triggering. So although this is not the case for everyone, most people that I've met, that I've talked to, find this to be quite triggering and quite difficult to deal with, even if the comment is well-intentioned. Or in recovery, when they're eating again, they might have to eat more than what the average person has to eat in order to put on weight. And that's, first of all, scary and a difficult thing to do, but then getting comments on that can push them right back. So that's something to probably avoid. There are some things you can do as well. So I quite liked having meals with my family, because I knew that if I ate on my own, it would be much more difficult, and I'd get all sorts of obsessive thoughts or want to restrict. And for some, it's also helpful to cook together, to have the meals together, although this also depends on the individual. So I think the most important thing is to talk to them, to listen to them. And yeah, that's probably, to be a listening ear is probably the most important thing.
Right, so obviously through the book you don't kind of gloss over the challenges of living with an eating disorder and the effects it can have on different types of relationships. Why do you think it's important for the story to be truthful?
I think it's important to be truthful because there's already a lot of stories out there that have just been made up and glamorized, and I think it's important to see the good and the bad, and to see the effect that an eating disorder can have not only on one person's life, but on everyone around them. So friends, family, romantic relationships, because it does affect all of these. And it's not just about the one person.
So obviously in the book, Christina's therapist takes an interesting approach to therapy. It's kind of more focused on art therapy. Did you have to do a lot of research into the types of therapy, and what made you decide to kind of concentrate more on art therapy as an option?
I did have to do a bit of research because there's a lot of therapies out there, but then again, I myself have also tried out quite a few. I've even gone to hypnotherapy, among several others, because regular cognitive behavioral talking therapies didn't really work very well for me. I found art therapy to be one that was used quite a lot, and one that helped many people out simply because it also distracts you, keeps your mind busy while you're able to be engaged in this creative process. So that is one that I myself found quite helpful, and that I've seen have a lot of success with, well, people that I know as well. So that's why I wanted to feature that one specifically in the book.
So the book obviously deals with a lot of emotionally tough subjects, not obviously just eating disorders, but topics like depression and alcoholism and other things. Did this make the book difficult to write for you?
It was difficult to write, although at the same time, as I mentioned before, quite cathartic. It really helped me to write these things down so they were not just buzzing around in my head. But then when I read over some of the scenes that I've written, and ultimately the entire book, when I read through everything again, that was actually quite difficult, because I was in my room an entire day just going through all the pages and seeing if it was ready to be published at that point. And when I got to the end of it, I literally started to cry, just because, one, I had finished the book and I was really happy about that, but two, I also had no idea how people were going to react to it, and just all the scenes that I just read were just still in my mind, and I was reliving it all, so it was quite tough sometimes.
So what made you decide to self-publish?
I did a lot of research into this, and there's lots of different routes to publishing. I preferred self-publishing so that I could make my own book covers. That was a big one for me, and it also helped me get quite a wide distribution, because Amazon has probably the most channels out there, and it's, for most people, quite an easy way to get the book.
Because I didn't actually know you designed the covers, so I guess the next question from that would be, what made you choose kind of the imagery
For the first one, I was thinking of, well, first of all, blue color, because, and especially in the first one, there's quite some difficult scenes, and I found blue to symbolize that quite well. And then, because the first one is quite focused on the eating disorder itself, I have the feet and the scale. For the second one, I wanted the book to be, the cover to be sort of in a similar format, or to look sort of similar, so that's why the colors are similar, but obviously a different color, the red, because for me, that's just what symbolized the book. There was much more passion inside of the protagonist, who started to regain her life again. So that's why it's red, and also the fist, because it symbolizes strength. It does have the text on the wrist, which from far looks a bit like scars, which is linked to the theme of self-harm, which is also covered in both of the books.
So obviously, whilst you were writing, obviously with it being difficult subjects, did you have any self-care practices or routines that you used to kind of help you through the writing process?
The writing itself for me was in part self-care, but whenever I found it difficult, either writing or the actual recovery process, I would talk to my parents or to my sister, and I kept a diary and ensured that I did some of the things that made me feel more at peace with myself. So writing itself was part of that, reading, and yeah, just talking with the people that understood, or at least tried to understand what I was going through.
Yeah, so you kind of mentioned yourself writing a diary there. The book's actually kind of a mix of first-person narrative and diary entries. Kind of what made you, well, why did you choose to kind of mix up kind of the styles and have both, rather than just picking one?
At first, I thought I would make it diary style, but I felt like I was missing lots of information and the perspective of some of the other characters, so that they became more static, and that's not really the effect I wanted to create, because I wanted all of them to really speak to the reader. So that's why I decided to also include regular text, which probably makes up most of the books. For the diary entries, though, I actually read through my own diary entries, and some of the diary entries written by the protagonist, Christina, were in part from my own entries, which was interesting to reread sometimes.
Really interesting. So what kind of came first, and was it kind of the first person narrative, or was it the diary entries, or did you just kind of do a bit of both?
I mostly did a bit of both. I sort of wrote it down as it came to me, because I initially wasn't planning to publish it, and it was mostly just getting it all written down.
So obviously, as well as all the books you've written, I know you've like blogged and vlogged a lot about your recovery, and kind of what inspired you to kind of use all these different media to kind of express your journey?
I started off blogging to help other people that wanted to write books like me, so that they knew what options were available to them, and what publishing methods there were. And then one day, more as a bit of a promotional strategy for the book, I made a YouTube video about what I eat in a day, and I sort of just put that out there on YouTube and didn't look back at it for several months. But when I look back, it had loads of views, and I was really surprised. So from that point on, my blog and, well, the videos that I subsequently made became more centered around mental health and eating disorders, because I got a lot of positive feedback about these, and people wanted to see more, and they wanted to hear my thoughts about it, and lots of them were quite uncertain about the recovery process, or about what they were experiencing, if this was something that other people were experiencing as well. So because of this feedback and because of the many messages that I received from the videos I put out, I continued making them, and the channel is still growing. So
it's really cool. So is it kind of like the whole kind of blogging about eating disorders? Is that kind of a growing community? Would you say? Is it kind of, or is it kind of already kind of quite big and reached its peak? Do you think?
I think it's quite big, but I do think that it's probably still growing because the stigma is still there and people are afraid to go and ask people the questions that are bothering them, whereas on YouTube they might be able to find this information. They can contact people that have gone through the same thing. So I get quite a few messages every day, people asking for advice or telling me about something in one of my videos that might have helped them. And that's also why I continue making these videos.
So, what advice would you give anyone that's suffering from an eating disorder?
My advice would be to do something that is truly for yourself and that helps you. So for me, that was writing, but for someone else, that might be art or playing an instrument, or any other way to really find your core values. I also think it's quite helpful to seek actual treatment. For many people, that is cognitive behavioral therapy, but for me personally, that didn't really help. So if you find that you do one type of therapy and it's not for you, then realize that there's so many other things out there as well. There's occupational therapy, there's art therapy, there's hypnotherapy. So there's honestly so much help available. So do take the help that's there because it can be really helpful if you're in a difficult place.
So obviously, kind of the eating disorder in the book was kind of triggered by kind of certain events that happened in the beginning. What kind of made you decide to kind of use like a triggering point for the eating disorder rather than it just kind of always being there? If that kind of makes sense.
For many people, an eating disorder starts out, well, technically there's a genetic aspect to it that is then triggered by a situation or by several situations or environmental factors. So I thought that I would include the same thing that actually happened to me, which is probably the cause or part of the cause of the struggles that I went through. So in the book, Christina is bullied by her classmates, and that is something that I experienced as well, which made me quite uncomfortable and really self-conscious. So that's why I included that as one of the triggers for the protagonist's eating disorder.
I'm going to be honest, I did not write down enough questions. I thought this is going to take longer. Has anybody got any questions from the audience? Has anybody got any questions they would like to ask? Yeah, go.
Do you find the fact that you wrote the books and people are constantly asking you questions about it, kind of like it's reinforcing it and like won't let, like you can't leave it behind you, do you know what I mean? So like if you're going to go into a career which might help other people who are suffering, do you think it might stop you like moving on from it completely?
That's something I've asked myself as well, because now that I'm sort of past these struggles, now that I'm no longer obsessing about the same things that used to keep me occupied all the time before, I thought that maybe having this channel or this book or the blog might weigh me down a bit, or might make it more difficult to really overcome some of these struggles. But as I continue doing it, I realize that it's just something I do that I like to do and that helps other people. So I don't think it really gets in the way, and I enjoy doing it. So I think I will continue doing this for still a while in any case. I can't say for how long, but yeah.
question. So obviously you're a psychology student here. Do you think your kind of experiences helped you choose psychology, or do you think you were kind of always interested in it and then just decided to choose it?
I was always quite interested in it, but when I was deciding the course that I wanted to continue at university, I didn't really have any idea what I wanted to do because there were so many things that I was interested in and I wanted to keep my options open. So that was a bit of a struggle, and I thought, well, with psychology I can still go different ways, and with psychology I can still help people, which I like doing. So I do think that my experiences did influence the choice a little bit, yeah.
And obviously you blog, vlog, and write. Do you have like a favourite medium out of the three, or is it kind of a bit hard to choose between them all?
I really like writing, but with all the vlogging that gets a bit difficult sometimes because it takes up a lot of time. Blogging was something that I did a lot of several years ago, not quite as much now. I think at the moment it's mostly vlogging just because it's quite personal to be able to speak directly, well, through a computer or a mobile phone, but speak directly to whoever's watching, whoever's following, and it makes it a bit more personal. So I quite like vlogging, at least at the moment.
And kind of obviously you being a student, a writer, and a vlogger, that must be quite a hard balance. How do you kind of balance time between all three?
That's also a difficult one because I don't want to overload myself with stress, which is why writing I do a little bit of every few days, but mostly just diary writing. But that's mostly for myself. And vlogging I do less frequently during the school year, during the year. So maybe once every few weeks or once every month, as opposed to every week or every day. And except for that, I try to stay on top of assignments and do what all the students here do. So.
Nice. So obviously as well as Just Perfect and Red Ribbons, you've co-written the recovery letters. What inspired you to kind of co-author that rather than just kind of write it yourself? Was it kind of like different perspectives, or?
For those two, I was actually contacted by another author, by two different authors. One that was looking for some more recovery stories, so the recovery letters, and asking me if I want to get involved with that. As for the other book, the author also wanted some first-hand experiences in her book, and she had the book written in Dutch and needed translations into English, so I actually translated that book into English as well. So that's how I got involved with those two.
And I guess the obvious question would be, is there a planned sequel to the series?
At the moment, there isn't. I think I quite like the way it ends, and it seems complete to me now. I can't say there never will be. I am working on some different projects, so it won't. Even if something does come up later, it won't be for the near future. But I'm not going to say it's never going to happen.
So what kind of work are you stories are you thinking of? Are they more kind of based on mental health, or you think you're going like a completely different direction? Or
I've tried some different things, but I think I prefer the mental health stories just because of the impact they make. The fact that I can, I think, understand some of these processes and some of these cognitions. So, yeah, I tend to stick with that nowadays.
Does anybody have any questions?
I was going to ask, what was the most positive thing that someone's told you about your books while you've been, since you've written them? what interactions have you had with people from your blogs and blogs that has really like fulfilled you?
Sometimes I get sent photos of people with the book, and they just tell me they're overjoyed that it arrived, that they're gonna read it now. And also after people have read it, I sometimes get back messages about how it really helped them to get a new perspective and how it was very inspirational to them. And yeah, when I see that, that just makes me really happy, because that's exactly why I want to continue doing this.
You mentioned like the stigma around eating disorders. Did that like cause you any apprehension when you thought about like publishing it, with people reading about you, or maybe linking it to your
Lots,
experience?
yeah. Initially, also when I published it, I promoted it mostly as a fiction novel, because I was sort of afraid of the things that other people were going to say or what they were going to think of it. But the reaction was quite positive, and from the start I had sort of said that it was a fictional memoir. And yeah, I never really talked about having suffered from depression or from eating disorders with anyone before, and then I sort of put it out there and got feedback from people that took some courage, and that they were happy that it was being talked about as well, and that it was a bit more normalized, because there are a lot of people that are suffering. So it's sort of stupid, really, that people don't talk about it.
What do you think among the general public is the biggest misunderstanding about eating disorders? What would you think is generally misunderstood about them?
I think most people think that eating disorder is about really just about losing weight, or about being thin, about fitting a certain kind of ideal, which is also why lots of the interventions are about models not being allowed to be so skinny, or advertising needing to change drastically. And although I do think that's a good thing to make models, for example, more representative, that's not going to tackle the problem, because most eating disorders are caused by stress, trauma, and external events that just seem unsurmountable, that require some kind of coping mechanism that the person doesn't feel they have. So eating disorders are not just about losing weight or being thin, they're so much more.
So kind of, if you were kind of in charge of media, how would you kind of tackle that stigma of it just being just about weight loss?
Oh, that's a difficult question. Yeah, like in the book, I think just underlining that there's different events or different triggers that can cause eating disorders, as well as any other mental health issues, I think.
In terms of media, is there anything you've kind of read or seen kind of that you think is like a good example of how, obviously, apart from your books, like a good example of how mental health and kind of eating disorders should be portrayed in the media, or just to the general public?
Again, that's quite challenging, because while I was writing these, there are several other books, several other memoirs as well that I read to see experiences that other people have had. And some of them were mainly happy. They sort of skipped over some of the more difficult parts, potentially also because it's quite difficult to write about. And although that is, it could be motivational to know that it gets better, that it'll be all right. I think it's also important to show some of the negatives, to show that people are not alone in their struggles and that this is normal. But then there's the risk of focusing on this too much, and there's one book that I did read. I think it was called Wasted or something along those lines, and it focused on the negatives a bit too much, and there was a lot of reviews by people saying that it was just really triggering because of the information that was in there, and because it gave such a gloomy kind of outlook. So it's a bit of a balancing act.
Does anybody else have any questions they'd like to ask? Okay, I think we'll should we wrap it up there then. Okay, so well, thank you everyone again for coming, and obviously thanks for taking the time out to do this. Is there where the best places kind to keep up with what you're doing and kind of any work that's coming up soon?
I have a mailing list. I have a YouTube channel. I have a blog. I try to stay on top of all of those. So, yeah, any of these are probably a good place to go. So if you just search Hannah Arts, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of things that pop up. So, yeah.
So once again, thanks to everyone for turning up. For the rest, obviously, because this is a mental eating disorder awareness week, we have the meet and greet tomorrow for the facilitate courses, which includes the eating disorder awareness group. If anybody wants to go to that, and that's from 5:15 to 7:30 in Chancellor's Building 3.15, and you kind of talk to facilitators about kind of eating disorder group, or we also wrote the Positive Minds course for low mood and depression. Talk to them about that, and I think there's a couple of supporters sessions coming up for if you want to support a friend or family member with eating disorder or low mood and self-harm. And obviously Friday in here at 6:30 we have the Louis Theroux screening, talking to anorexia. If anybody wants any more information about Student Minds, you can follow us on our Facebook page and Twitter, or you can sign up to our mailing list and I can take your details down, or through the SU page. And obviously feel free to come ask Han or me any questions at the end. And obviously if you want to buy Han's book,